Richard Reeves has been doing a very good job recently of getting himself some publicity, and of drawing attention to the educational disadvantages of boys. What he hasn't done is actually focus on the real cause. He hasn't even mentioned in any of the appearances that I've seen discrimination as one of the causes of that disadvantage. And his remedies for the problem are terrible and easily disproven. But let's look at this video that he's put out. Male inequality explained by an expert. That would be him, I suppose.
A number of people warned me against writing a book about boys and men.
Name names, Reeves. Name 'em and shame 'em.
Because it's such a fraught subject, particularly in politics right now, and because so many people...
A group are suffering from extreme and unfair discrimination in education. It makes you wonder why that would be such a fraught subject to talk about, doesn't it? But don't worry, Richard Reeves won't be talking about that.
We're afraid that merely drawing attention to the problems of boys and men was implying somehow less effort being paid to girls and women.
I don't want to sound like I'm reinforcing traditional gender norms here, but what a fucking pussy. Can we just stop all this mealy-mouthed nonsense, please? If you want to deal with widespread discrimination against men and boys, then the first thing you have to do is stop pretending that women are actually the ones who are disadvantaged. And yeah, that means that we're not going to focus all our educational efforts on, like, getting girls into STEM or whatever. We can't focus at the same time on helping the disadvantaged minority and also helping the privileged majority. We need to focus on helping one against the other. And I think he's made his choice. Just like Val, Shanana and the rest, the first priority is let's not focus less on girls and women.
It's framed as a zero-sum, and it's sort of a whose side are you on?
There are limited resources, and this is a matter of priorities. And you'll find plenty of powerful people in education trying to get more women into STEM, and they don't give a shit about helping out boys and men.
Question, and you have to be on one side or the other, rather than just being on the side of human flourishing.
Well, if you're on the side of human flourishing, then you need to help the humans who are not already flourishing. And that is one very specific group. And that means, yeah, we're going to need to spend a lot less effort on the girls in STEM narrative.
Is that if there are men missing from certain crucial areas of our society and our economy, that makes it harder for other men and boys to flourish in those areas.
That's a real issue, but the question is, what does he want to do about it?
We have an education system that has a dearth of male teachers.
And getting worse. But is he going to suggest affirmative action or something? Well, the pattern is that he's probably not going to suggest anything.
We have a labour market where the jobs that are growing fastest are ones where we have the fewest men.
And the percentage of men in those jobs continues to go down year over year. But is he going to actually suggest doing something about it? Again, I'm going to say no.
And in families, there's the growth in what you might call the dad deficit or fatherlessness.
Okay, are we going to change the way the family courts work? Are we going to pass shared parenting legislation? Are we going to get any suggestions in the video, or just a vague recognition that a problem exists?
There's a very real danger that unless we act quite soon, that we will set in train something of a vicious cycle.
Too late. Yeah, the number of men in all of those professions has been going down for a very long time now. 50 years or more, in fact. What there aren't here is any suggestions for how to reverse that.
The overall picture is that on almost every measure, at almost every age, and in almost every advanced economy in the world, the girls are leaving the boys.
Well, I can certainly see why that makes it so important that we don't stop focusing on girls' issues.
What nobody expected was that girls and women wouldn't just catch up to boys and men in education, but would blow right past them and keep going.
It's not a matter of expectation, it's a matter of intent. For decades, legislation and lobbying was aimed entirely at reordering the education system to be better for girls and women. I don't think you really need to be a genius to predict that it would then become better for girls and women. So feigning shock at the obvious results doesn't really win me over.
Everyone was very focused, quite rightly, on getting to gender equality, getting to gender parity.
But the reality is that that was never the focus. There was never any effort to increase the number of men in nursing school, for example. The focus was always just increasing the number of girls in what were traditionally male areas. That's not a focus on parity or equality.
It's not that long ago where there was a huge gender gap the other way, and there was huge focus, correctly, in the 70s and 80s.
There are people going to university today whose grandparents went to university after it became a majority female student body. This isn't, it's a recent change, we just haven't had time to adapt yet. No, this is very much something that's been planned, been pursued intentionally, and which the people responsible for have absolutely no intention of allowing to be reversed. And then I'm editing quite a lot out because you're just repeating the same claims. No one could have seen it coming. It's all so recent. How could this have happened?
So if you look at the US, for example, in the average school district in the US, girls are almost a grade level ahead of boys.
And do you know how to fix that? Do you know how to improve the work of boys by an entire grade level overnight with just one simple change? You just take their name off it. Because the same piece of work, with a male name or a female name, will receive a very different average score. But discrimination isn't something that he's going to allow himself to talk about.
In English, and have caught up in math. If we look at those with the highest GPA scores, the top 10%, 2/3 of those are girls. If we look at those at the bottom, 2/3 of those are boys.
And GPAs are based entirely on assessment by teachers. Teachers who are known to be actively discriminating against male students, possibly based on stereotyping or a misguided desire to help the supposedly disadvantaged female students, but demonstrably they are discriminating against male students. Results on SAT tests, which have a less subjective marking component, are far more equal. Because, strangely, to resolve the discrimination that boys and men face, all you really have to do is remove that discrimination. So why isn't he talking about that?
And the result of those trends is that the gender gap in getting a college degree is now wider than it was in 1972, but the other way around. So in 1972, when Title IX was passed to promote more gender equality in education, there was a 13 percentage point gap in favour of men getting college degrees.
Shout out to Title IX for all and any other group that's using Title IX to try and fight against discrimination against boys and men. But they are somewhat overburdened because there's just no real enforcement by government of that law when it comes to anything that happens to men. So maybe we should do something about that as well. Like, there's a suggestion, which is already one more suggestion than he's made in this entire video.
There's quite a fierce debate about the differences between male and female brains, and in adulthood, I think there's not much evidence that the brains are that different in ways that we should worry about or that are particularly consequential.
Right, only in adulthood, because puberty famously reduces the number of differences between boys and girls and men and women.
But where there's no real debate is in the timing of brain development. It is quite clear that girls' brains develop more quickly than boys' brains do.
So, all this video, and there's not a single mention at any point of discrimination. There's not a single mention even of something like harmful stereotyping. But he jumps straight into ridiculous pseudoscience. I don't know why this dude is the one getting mainstream media attention, but it's really sending things in the wrong direction.
And that the biggest difference seems to occur in adolescence. I think it's a great irony of women's progress that by taking the brakes off women's educational opportunities and aspirations, we've revealed the fact that the education system is slightly structured against boys and men because of these differences in the timing of brain development. But it took the women's movement to show that, because the natural advantages of women in education were impossible to see when women's aspirations were being capped by a sexist society.
And that idea is the whole problem. Women were disadvantaged, well, that must have been because of discrimination. Men become disadvantaged after decades of specifically lobbying for exactly that to happen. Well, that must have been a biological inevitability.
I do think that we should be strongly encouraging boys to start school a year later than girls. I think that should become the default in many school districts.
If that was really a biological thing, it makes you wonder why he would only want it in some school districts.
Because of the developmental gap that there is between boys and girls. Because boys' brains mature more slowly, then...
You know, I looked up the studies that supposedly show this developmental gap. It turns out that the relevant difference is less than 1/5 of a standard deviation. We're not talking here about holding boys back for a year, maybe a fortnight at most, honestly. And that's if we assume that holding boys back or holding children back in general is actually beneficial, something for which the evidence is, at best, extremely split, with as much evidence for harm as help. So I really don't know how Richard Reeves has come to have an obsession with this particular idea, given its complete lack of evidentiary support.
We need a lot more male teachers. It's striking that the teaching profession has become steadily more female over time. That has all kinds of consequences for the ethos of the school, for the way we deal with different kinds of behaviour among boys and girls, for example, and so...
I mean, he's right. As far as he goes, he's correct. But where he doesn't go is causes. Why there is this imbalance, and obviously how to overcome that imbalance. Saying that we need to do it, it's the minimum that you can do, it's the basic start, but first you need to realise exactly why there are fewer and fewer men going into teaching. And I've got no studies to show it, but the anecdotal evidence I've come across is just of extreme mistreatment and extreme suspicion of male teachers, and he's not going to address that, so ultimately the problem will go unsolved.
We need a very serious and intentional effort to get more men into teaching.
We need a very specific list of actual policies that you support, because otherwise this is just, won't somebody do something? And then no suggestions about what to do.
The third thing I would do in this world where I have significant power to dictate policies would be significantly more investment in vocational education and training. That is an area where we do seem to see better results for boys and men on average.
Have you ever heard of ghettoization? So the problem is not enough men going through university and achieving education, just abandoning them and expecting them to go into blue-collar labour or whatever. It's not really a solution to the problem. And that's about as much of this smug twat as I can take. But rest assured that when he goes on to talk about the workplace and the family, he takes exactly the same approach. Place the blame on men when possible. Acknowledge that problems exist, but refuse to offer any real solutions to any of them. And above all else, refuse to recognise that there is such a thing as discrimination against men. So ultimately, he's got a lot of words here, but doesn't really say anything worth hearing.